Hello Ultrawide fans, let's see how Assassin's Creed Shadows perform at the Super Ultrawide 5120x1440p resolution. Let's start off looking at the base performance without any upscaling or frame generation. Here we are using ultra high settings with ray tracing on, as it's on by default at every performance level. At a glance you can see that no cards are able to reach 60 FPS. The 4090 and 7900 XTX are only clearing 30 FPS threshold, but the 4090 is the only one of the two, with 1% lows over 30. So it's the only card that's going to have a playable experience with a monitor that has both variable refresh rate and low frame rate compensation. The 7900 XTX's 1% lows are very bad, but I believe this is because AMD GPUs have a higher CPU overheads, and we've finally gotten to a game where my 5800 X3D is no longer enough to keep up. You will see why I say it's CPU related when we get to the frame gen results. Moving on, we see the 4080, 7900 XT, 4070 Ti, and 4070 all fail to make 30 FPS for their averages. The 1% lows are quite tight for all the Nvidia cards, while the XT also suffers CPU bottlenecking when it comes to 1% lows. Since none of our cards manage 60 FPS, let's turn on some quality upscaling to see if any of them make it across the line. Turning on quality upscaling for both DLSS and FSR puts the 7900 XT and 4090 within 10 FPS of 60. The XTX still suffers from terrible 1% lows thanks to the CPU bottleneck. The 4090, however, is getting well above 30, so you'll have a decent play experience. The RTX 4080, 4070 Ti, and 700 XT, and 4070 all managed to clear 30 FPS with upscaling on, but only the 4080 and 4070 Ti managed to feat with their 1% lows, for a console-like experience for anyone with low frame rate compensation. The 700 XT and 4070 fail to clear 30 FPS with their 1% lows, and the XT is still hampered by its driver CPU overheads. Since none of the cards actually reach 60, the cutoff that AMD and Nvidia both recommend before turning on FrameGen, let's try and find more FPS by dropping the settings to high. With high settings on, we finally see some cards clear 60 FPS for their averages, with the 4090 and 7900 XTX clearing that mark. The RTX 4090 even manages to deliver 1% lows over 45 FPS, which is my personal 1% low cutoff. For 1% low performance that I would consider to provide a smooth gameplay on an active sync monitor. The 7900 XTX still can't get away from its CPU hampered 1% lows, though they now clear 30 FPS, while the 4080, 4070 Ti, and 700 XT all clear 45 FPS for their average. And the 4080 and 4070 Ti have 1% lows over 40, making for a better than console experience. The XT's 1% lows are still suffering. The 4070 managed to clear 30 FPS for its averages and 1% lows for a console-like gaming experience. Finally, with some of our cards clearing the 60 FPS mark, we can turn on frame generation to see what kind of performance jump we get. Assassin's Creed Shadows has integrated both DLSS and FSR frame generation, so this is one of a few games where the frame gen battle is a fair fight. The 700 XTX and 4090 see big gains. The 4090 is doing way better than I've ever seen in the past with Nvidia frame generation. The new DLSS 4 enhanced frame gen is nearly twice as efficient as DLSS 3 frame gen was. Both cards clear the 90 FPS mark for the averages, crossing into the line into high refresh rate territory. And surprise, surprise, they're both in their 80s for their 1% lows. So you may be wondering, how did this 700 XTX improve its 1% lows so much when frame gen is turned on, when the expectation is for a 10 to 15% performance hit for both the average and 1% lows before the frames are doubled? Well, the average did see that performance hit, but somehow the 1% lows saw a 25% performance gain before being frame doubled. Well, the only explanation I have for this is that the time between each regular frame when the GPU is working on the generated frame all by itself is enough time for the CPU to catch up and prepare the next regular frame for the GPU, relieving the CPU bottleneck. So, amazingly, frame gen on is the smoothest and most responsive way to play with an AMD GPU if your CPU is a little on the slow side. Moving down the stack, the 4080, 4070 Ti, 700 XT, and the 4070 are all clearing 60 FPS with their averages, and the 4080 and 4070 Ti clear 60 with its 1% lows, while the 700 XT and 4070 manage 1% lows in their 50s. Now, let's look at the performance uplifts for each performance setting. The overall results show a staggered grouping of performance, with the 700 XTX and 4090 in one group, the 4080, 700 XT, and 4070 Ti in another, and the 4070 alone in its own tier. The The 7900 XTX performs very well against the NVIDIA RTX 4090, despite this game having ray tracing used at every performance setting from ultra high to low, as long as you have an equally monstrous CPU to feed it. Thanks for watching. If you like these videos and want to catch some more, please subscribe. The more of you that subscribe, the better the chance of me to getting a GPU vendor to listen to me and send me some test samples. If you have a regular Ultrawide or a 5K 2K Ultrawide, those videos are available for you to click on. If you want to help this channel out in other ways, you can become a member, sign up for Patreon, or use my Amazon affiliate link. I'm Scott, and I'll see you next time, Ultrawide fans.